Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first school committee meeting of March. You probably missed not seeing us for a few weeks, but we're back. And thank you for joining us in person today. This is a good crowd. So let's begin. First, we have administrative business, a vote to appoint an acting secretary. I will move that. Is there a second? Thank you, Suzanne. And I'm going to move that we specifically appoint as acting secretary Betsy Fitzpatrick. Is there a second?
Second.
Your vote, Stephen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Take back.
Andy?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
All right, so we will have Betsy as acting secretary today.
Val, did you just say that you're getting feedback over there?
No. I'm fine. Thanks.
All right, so now consent. Yes. So now consent agenda. Would someone like to move the consent agenda? Thank you, Stephen. Is there a second? Thank you, Suzanne. Stephen, your vote?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Valerie? Mariah?
Yes.
See Valerie unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and I also vote yes. So that brings us to student report. Is Alice on with us? Okay, go ahead, Alice, whenever you're ready.
Okay, awesome. Hi everyone. It's been a little while. A few things have happened at our school since my last report. Obviously, we just had our April break. We had our Spirit Week, and importantly, we had the Day of Change at BHS. As you all know, Day of Change is a day of education and growth regarding topics of consent culture and greater community. It's organized by Sharp Warriors, and this year we had a great day. There was a lesson on consent intersectionality. There was an incredible panel, and there was space for discussion and processing in our advisories. Today, I have two leaders of Sharp who really organized the day with a lot of other people, Olivia Sheehan and Nama Tomer, who are going to talk more about this.
Hi, good evening. I'm Olivia Sheehan, and this is Nama Tomer, and we are the student co-leaders with Nisha Kennedy of SHARP, which is the Sexual Harassment and Assault Response and Prevention Coalition at the high school. For anyone who maybe isn't aware of SHARP's history, it was started 3 years ago in response to a social reckoning at the high school about issues of sexual assault, consent, and violence prevention. And since then, we've done a ton of work, mostly around peer education, but also looking at the handbook, addressing student needs, looking at what does the sports look like and what does the health and wellness curriculum look like.
Like Alice already mentioned, Day of Change this year was very successful, starting with planning at the beginning of the year, but feedback was taken all the way back from last year's Day of Change and any Day of Change in the past. A block was filled with specific lessons for each grade, talking about SHARP specific lessons about consent, culture, and intersectionality. B block included a speaker panel with professionals from all over the area, and then advisory followed up with a lot of interactive conversations or writing prompts discussing the day. SHARP in total has about 25 members who worked very hard throughout the whole entire year on this day, and we meet once a week during faculty collab time, along with our incredible advisors, Kira Flynn Carson, who is an English teacher, and a social worker, Abby Dean, and together we collaborate on this day.
We think Day of Change this year was a tremendous success, and we got very positive feedback from students. SHARP and Day of Change, as I mentioned earlier, were created in response to a social reckoning at the high school. And I think especially with, recent CDC reports that maybe you guys have seen about kind of this epidemic of violence and sexual violence, particularly with teenage girls, I think we just want to re-stress that it's imperative, in our opinion, that Day of Change remains a yearly event at the high school. And we really appreciate the support given to us by school committee and by many members of staff and administration at the high school. I think one big thing that would help us next year and in the years beyond is just even more constant communication between SHARP, who plan the day, and the administration that facilitate the distribution of the day. With projects requiring upwards of 40 hours of work, last minute changes without smooth communication cause a drift in not only the presentation and the audience, but also with SHARP and the administration, which is never the intention because everyone has the same positive goals regarding Day of Change.
Day of Change is also SHARP's most public event, but we work all year round on a lot of projects to just make the high school a safer place in general. So another project we have begun is open discussion seminars, which is inviting not only just the 25 members who do constant work for SHARP, but basically engaging the student body in conversation past these days of, which we only get a certain amount of blocks. But for example, X blocks once around every month, something like that.
Another goal of SHARP is the development of Captain's Council, which is for the captains of sports teams to be educated on issues of consent and to try and change the culture of sports from within. As captains of varsity sports ourselves, we recognize that being a team captain is a privilege, and we're really excited about the large impact that this council would have. And we would just love the school committee support in this initiative as we work with our wonderful athletic director, Kyle Williams, in its development.
We again appreciate all the opportunities for us to talk to you and speaking with you all today. Thank you so much for any prior support. We continue the support continues in the years coming and following. Since we are seniors, this will keep on getting passed on to the juniors and other grades, and we hope just the same support and communication can continue.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, guys. This work is so important, so thank you so much. Yeah, I just want to end this by echoing all of that and saying that it's so essential to have Day of Change at our high school and to have SHARP and have student learner groups like SHARP. That work just really impacts our school community and is so important. Thank you.
Anything further for your student report, Alice?
No, this is good.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions or comments from school committee members? Stephen?
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for that report. What does the Day of Change entail? What are the activities on that day?
Yeah, do you want to take it? Or?
Sure. So the day includes 3 blocks as given to us by the school. So A block, which is the first block in the morning, contains specific lessons catered to each and every grade. So 9th grade lessons different from the 10th grade and so on and so on. And the A block was meant to kind of talk about the intersectionality that comes along with consent culture as well as rape culture. So that goes as far as defining definitions of consent, what sexual assault means, what rape means, to also where it applies not only in VHS, but in the world that us teenagers exist in. That comes with showing statistics of kind of our age group, as well as gender statistic, race statistics, and everything that we think should be in the education, but maybe doesn't have a space in specific classes that everybody takes. So statistics are shown as well as activities that people can help apply the knowledge that they gain throughout the day. And that was a very good segue into our B block, which was a panel of professionals varying from either professors of different schools or people who work in domestic violence as well as other communities. And they tend to speak upon what it looks like to help communities outside of high school and also where this work applies in the real world. And then students were able to ask questions, and these professionals were able to hold a conversation, and students were able to see what this conversation may look like outside of just kind of a facilitated classroom, but really where this applies. And then advise, oh, sorry. But
And that B block is mandatory for the entire high school?
Yes, so A, B, and advisory are technically mandatory for the entire high school. Obviously, if people have free blocks, we offered spaces such as the auditorium or other classrooms that students were able to go into. So we really encouraged this to be a day that was at full attendance as much as we could, I guess, announce that.
That's amazing. And for A block, are those conversations facilitated by the classroom teachers?
So we have options for that. So about 2 to 3 weeks in advance of Day of Change, we sent out a Google form to all of the teachers so that any teacher who wanted to opt out of the teaching of these lessons within their classrooms, either they didn't feel prepared or they want to opt out for personal reasons, Sharp trained a group of about 40 facilitators to go into classrooms and facilitate those lessons. So I would say there's probably a good 50-50 split on the day of classrooms that were facilitated by, I guess you would call them peer leaders, peer facilitators, and classrooms that were facilitated by their regular classroom teacher.
Wow, thanks very much.
Valerie?
Thank you for that. Is there anything that, in terms of policy, that you think would improve our culture around consent and related issues?
That is a very good question. So like we mentioned, we both came into the leadership role of Sharp this year as seniors. And I mean, right off the bat, something that comes to mind is the what was it called? Survivor Resource Bill that was passed.
Survivors' rights.
Yeah, Survivors' Rights Bill that was passed by the legislature at the high school last year. It was passed, but then it was, I think, vetoed for legal reasons at the headmaster's level, the head of schools level. And so I think, that is another thing that I think we haven't touched on as much this year, but I think we kind of want to like dive back into at the handbook level, what are policy changes that can be made? Before that bill was passed, the words like sexual assault, I don't think appeared at all within the handbook. And that often, even while there's obviously Title IX policy at the high school, that would leave students feeling kind of disempowered of not totally knowing what to do after an assault occurs, or any type of harassment occurs. So I think that is a first step, is kind of just re-engaging with that, those issues.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, well, thank you very much to the three of you for your presentation under student report. It was quite informative, and as you saw, school committee has a lot of interest in the valuable work you're doing. So thank you again. You're welcome to stay for the rest of our meeting if you like, but we understand if you want to call it an evening and move on to other tasks. All right, so that now brings us to the superintendent's report.
Good evening, Brookline. Tonight, we will walk you through some updates over the past few weeks and then give a look ahead to some items coming forward. So we'll walk through some community highlights, take a look at my recent school visits, important dates, and then our spotlight on excellence. The Office of Registration and Enrollment has begun accepting registration applications for the upcoming school year. So Brookline families, make sure you are actively participating in that process. Staff at BHS are finishing up the very popular transition events for current 8th graders. Last night there was a panel discussion about life at BHS, very well attended, and students were giving some practical advice. And the one that I want to highlight that I heard was put those cell phones away. You'll gain much more academic time by giving up some time on those cell phones. Peak and practice sessions for rising kindergarten and current BEEP students will also be held at each school this spring, and we'll make sure that those dates are sent out in the community notice. We're excited to announce that Mark Goldner, middle school science teacher at Heath School, is a 2023 recipient of the American Geosciences Institute Edward C. Roy Jr. Award for Excellence in K-8 teaching, earth science teaching, Among other recipients, Mr. Goldner will be recognized at the National Science Teacher Association's annual conference in March of 2023. We congratulate Mr. Goldner on his well-deserved recognition and honor from the AGI. Brookline Cares is a volunteer group coordinated by BHS students. Hosted a skate night fundraiser at Lawrence Anderson Park earlier today to raise funds to provide clothing and resources to individuals in need. All proceeds will go directly to purchasing empowerment coats. This amazing product provides a coat, sleeping bag, and warmth for those experiencing homelessness. Through this initiative, Brookline Cares has donated socks, sleeping bags, and clothing to hospitals and organizations such as Tufts Medical Center, Boston Medical Center, and the City of Revere. So again, congratulations to those students, that student-led organization. National School Breakfast Week. In celebration of National School Breakfast Week, PSB Food Services is holding several special events, including a parent guardian breakfast buffet and outdoor mindful morning session. I look forward to being a celebrity server for breakfast at Lincoln School bright and early Monday morning. As part of these festivities, we are also inviting families to donate breakfast items for the Brookline Food Bank. Students may arrive at school with non-perishable breakfast items to donate anytime between March 6th and March 10th. Recently completed school visits as well as upcoming school visits. I've started my spring round of superintendent school days. I had the opportunity to visit Heath and Lawrence for my superintendent days. And on these days, I spend the entire day visiting the schools, talking with students, as well as spending time with faculty and staff. We held our Monday, February 13th school senior staff meeting at Baker School. And on Friday, February 17th, the day before break, Baker held its Blue Ribbon celebration. And fittingly enough, lunch was provided by Blue Ribbon Barbecue. And finally, the week prior to February break leading into, I attended the National Superintendent's Conference on Education down in San Antonio, Texas, attended quite a few sessions on leading well and living well. And so I look forward to working with our senior staff, our school leaders around those sessions. We all know the excitement for this week was whether or not to call a snow day. So Baker School, Tuesday, I think it was when I was there, a little second grader told me that there are ways to make a snow day happen. And so he said that you're supposed to put ice cubes, the amount of inches of snow, put that number of ice cubes in the toilet. He told me to open the freezer and yell "snow day" in the freezer. And each time you pass a snow globe, you're supposed to shake it. And the best part is you take a spoon and place it under your pillow. So I said, well, did it work for you this time? He's like, no, it didn't work. It's like, well, we'll keep trying for you. So some important dates for this month: Women's History Month, March 1 through March 31, Deaf History Month, Monday, March 13th through Saturday, April 15th. St. Patrick's Day, of course, is the 17th. Ramadan is Wednesday, March 22nd through Friday, April 21st. And International Transgender Day of Visibility is Friday, March 31st. So please adhere to these important dates. Now, for the best part of the superintendent's update is our spotlight on excellence. Helen, do you have a question before we go further?
I did. It was just a comment. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but St. Patrick's Day is also Evacuation Day in Boston. So it is a holiday in Boston, just so you know. It's one of those that's just Boston.
We won't be acknowledging that over here in Brookline, Helen.
That's fine. That's fine. I just thought I'd put that in for a little.
You put it into the ethos.
Yes.
So we are honored tonight to celebrate our national team squash champions. We are honored to shine the spotlight on excellence tonight on the student athletes of Brookline High School boys and girls squash teams, many of whom are here with us in person, along with their coach, Steve Lantos, and many family members. The BHS squash team is one of the oldest public school squash programs, and this year the boys team won the U.S. National Championship. After an exciting and successful season, the team earned a spot at the championships game in Philadelphia, and over the course of 4 thrilling playoff games last week, they emerged victorious. The boys and girls teams are very much connected as part of the overall BHS squash program, so this evening we celebrate the national championship victory and all the student athletes of the program for representing Brookline High School and the town of Brookline with honor and distinction. It is my pleasure to introduce Steve Lantos, team coach and BHS chemistry teacher, so that he can tell us a bit more about the team, the championship series, and introduce our student athletes. Mr. Lantos.
Great. Thank you, Superintendent Gilreath and members of the school committee. I wear a few hats around the place in addition to teaching chemistry and doing stuff with squash. I run our China exchange program, which has been dormant since COVID. And it's ironic that I stood here almost 4 years ago to the date to introduce the traveling students who will be going to Xi'an for the spring semester. But in doing so, I interrupted myself to say that our boys team had just finished an incredible string of wins. Area squash in Boston is very competitive. And so as a public school, we don't always get to play the teams that we want to, although now I'm sure that we will. We had just finished playing and beating Phillips Andover, Nobles, Buckingham Brown and Nichols, Phillips Exeter, and the Groton School. And this is like, if there were a D1 in high school squash, this was it. And so after that string of victories, I had to say that in addition to, although I was on the docket to talk about China, I just had to say that. And all of you as school committee members stood up and clapped. So that was fantastic. But I'm here tonight with some kind of synchronicity in that although I'm on the docket, we're on the docket to talk about squash. As of this morning, we officially resumed our China exchange program with our sister school in Xi'an by our China 6th class, A block, having a Zoom meeting paired with the equivalent number of students at the Gaoxin school, and A block, which meets from 8:20 to 9:15. All of our students introduced themselves to their counterparts at the Gaoxin school in Chinese, and then their paired students who they're exchanging with introduced themselves in English. And I sat in on part of it, and it was just wonderful. I mean, I had a tear in my eye. It was wonderful. So hopefully that will be a gentle, single baby step toward the beginning of the resumption of our exchange program. And I know 4 years ago, we invited 2 of the school committee members along with then superintendent and head of school, Anthony Meyer. We made a junket over to China and we met our counterparts. And I want to extend that invitation to all of you, hopefully next year and beyond when we resume our exchange. Yay. So yay. So that's my interruption of myself for China. But Ron, can I ask Ron Rubin, who coached the boys this year and was with the boys coaching them in Philadelphia? And I've been captain of the coach of the girls team, and this has really been a successful year on so many levels. This is the first time that we've had both a dedicated boys coach and a dedicated girls coach. And like the superintendent just said, there aren't many sports at the high school that integrate both boys and girls, men and women together. And in that sense, as we were playing at Philly, it just worked out beautifully that the boys played their match and the girls could all cheer behind the glass, and then the girls could have their match and the boys could cheer behind the glass. So it worked out perfectly, except for the final match, where our matches were scheduled the same. So thankfully, one of the parents, I was with the girls, one of the parents was able to stream live as the boys were playing at the Specter Center downtown in Philadelphia. And it just was so exciting. I can't go beyond, but a quick word about the history of our team. The kids have all heard this too many times, but Ron and I go way back, and our boys, Ron's oldest son and my son, when they were 4 or 5 years old, began playing squash. And as they got better and they got better and they got better than both of us, at a certain point, Ron and I said to each other, "Damn, wouldn't it be great to have a squash team when our boys get to the high school?" Well, they got to the high school, 9th grade, and recruited some of their athlete friends, mostly tennis players. We formed a team. Former director, Pete Rittenberg, athletic director, had told me that the Windsor School down the street had just built a new athletic facility, and they built 5 new courts. Pete had known that Ron and I were playing squash with many of the high school kids over the years. So Pete said, "Quick, assemble a team, get over there, introduce yourself to the athletic director, and the rest is history." So the Windsor School has been gracious enough to offer their 5 courts, and it's our home courts, and it's walking distance for many of the kids. Most of the parents have been there. Next year, I'm inviting all of you, school committee members and superintendent, to come during our annual parents, teachers versus students. And it's a lot of fun. I can't thank all of you enough for supporting the squash team and just squash in general as not a really common sport. It's a niche sport. I have a racket. If you're not familiar with the racket looks like, it's kind of like somewhere between a badminton racket and a tennis racket. Squash is played on 4 walled courts, and it's a very fast-paced game. And Ron and I, have seen our athletes over this year improve immensely. In terms of skills and ability, and it just, again, like a tear in our eyes watching them cheer and inspire each other's. Philadelphia is 6 hours drive away, but we had many parents come down and join us, and you just can't know that all that cheering when you're in the glass on the court, to know that you're being backed up by family, teammates, and friends just can make all the difference. So we had a great time in Philadelphia. We were halfway through the draw and it was looking good. And I don't know about you, Ron, but I was like, I think there's something going on here. I think we've got this. And again, the rest is history. I don't know if you want to say any words.
Sure. First of all, thank you for supporting the squash program, and to Brookline High for supporting a girls and boys varsity team. And we also have a JV team, and it's a pretty incredible group. The group worked really hard. The boys team worked really hard this year and really accomplished something that I don't think any of us was expecting. And I'm just so proud of them and all their efforts. And I want to tell you a little bit about the final match, because it was extremely exciting on many levels. So it's an 8-person team that goes down to nationals. Sorry, I've lost my voice. So it's an 8-person team that goes down to nationals, and numbers 1 through 7 count for the match, and whoever wins 4 matches or more wins the match and goes to the next round. So we did this. We had some really close matches getting to the finals, and then in the finals, we lost at 1, 2, and 3. Because a lot of these private schools, they actually recruit players at those levels. And then we won at 5, 6, and 7. And then it all boiled down to the number 4, who is Kieran Bacho. Where's Kieran? He's right there. So Kieran, it's a match is called best of 5, which means it's the first person to win 3 games. A game goes to 11, except you win by 2. So if you get to 10 all, it goes to 12, and if you get to 11 all, it goes to 13. So Kieran went up 2-love, playing beautiful squash, best I've seen him play. And then the other guy caught up to 2 all. And I think all of us were thinking doom and gloom at that point because the other guy had won 2 points. But he battled back, and it got to, I think the guy had 3 match balls. I think it was 3 match balls against you. He only had 2? Okay. And Kieran, on his first match ball at 12-11, won the match, how do you say, the team match and the tournament for us. So it was really amazing. So thank you, Karen. But that's actually not the order that it happened in. So in fact, it happened where we went 2-love up, and then we went 3-2 down. And then we had 2 other people on the court at the time. Leander and Jalen were both playing. And again, I think we lost the first game on both courts. Is that right? Yeah, so we lost the first game. So we were down 1-love to 3 games on both courts, and we were down 3-2, and we needed to win both courts in order to win. Well, they came back, and they fought and fought and fought. And it's really kind of like the emotions are so high. It's incredible. Every point is like screamed out because this is the finals, the national championships. And they pulled it out. And the thing that was the most beautiful thing is they both had match balls at the same time, and they won within like 30 seconds of each other. It was incredible. So, and it was a big moment for the team and a well-deserved moment. And it's a big moment for me, a big moment for Brookline High School. So well done, guys.
Squash definitely has a future for a lot of these players, and some of them know it, some of them don't, but recent graduates from Brookline High School who are now playing squash at the varsity level. We have one player at Washington University who's a senior. We have one player who's at Bates, who's a sophomore. We have 2 players playing currently on the Wesleyan varsity team. We have Ron's son, who's a junior playing at Dartmouth College, and my own son, who's a sophomore playing at Hobart. These are all people who are on the BHS squash team, so squash definitely has a future once you leave Brookline High School. So we have 2 more things, and then I don't know if any of you have questions, but one thing that we want to do is present the superintendent with a shirt, and you are now an honorary member of the BHS squash team. And then the last thing is I want to call the boys up. Let's go, right here. We're going to recreate for you the huddles that we have after the team introductions, but before the first match. So let's go, guys, right here. Gather up. Go, 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 go. One, two, three. Brookline! 4, 5, 6. Champions! Let's go! Thank you. And if anyone has any questions, please.
I actually do.
Suzanne?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is fabulous. Thank you. This is your plug for recruiting. Are most of your players squash players before they come to the high school, or do they start when they get to the high school?
Yeah, it's a great question, Suzanne. Like any sport, whether it's soccer, tennis, baseball, the earlier on you grow the program, the better position you're in for when the kids are competing at the high school level. So that's a conversation. Also access to courts is a really important thing. When Ron or I drive the school vans to, Phillips Exeter or the Groton School, and especially during the past few years that we've had the renovation going on, the kids see that these schools have an entire squash building that the kids have access to during their free periods and on the weekends. So we'd drive back to Brookline, and knowing that the renovation was going on, invariably kids would ask, well, can we build squash courts on campus? So I'm just putting that out there, putting that out there to you. But yeah, growing the program early on is important.
Helen, you also have a question?
Hi, Helen.
Actually, I wanted to just congratulate the team, both teams, the girls and boys team, and the coaches who, it sounds like you give your hearts to this, and we really appreciate it. And hi, Steve.
Hi, Helen. Thank you, Helen. I'll speak for Ron. We're both squash nuts, and it's a labor of love.
So I actually have a similar question to Suzanne. What would be your suggestion to those who are not yet high school age, who might have an interest in squash? Where would they go? What would they do?
You just talk to us and we can introduce them.
Yeah, Ron and I are very connected with area coaches. Boston, like Philly, a big squash city, has incredible access to former world number ones, former squash pros, some of whom coach either colleges or run clinics in the area. And so that's information that we continually put out to the squash community.
If you folks could support, a center for like all the schools, and it doesn't have to be expensive. They actually build them in bubbles sometimes, with maybe 4 or 5 squash courts, and we could start squash at 3rd or 4th grade. We would have national championship teams every year, and we would be, one of the strongest teams in the country. Because right now, you're right, when Steve and I were, had our kids, it just so happened that there was like 5 or 6 kids in the public school, all starting at around the age of 7 and 8, and they grew up together, and they were all at the top of squash in their age groups when they got to Brookline High School and formed this team that Steve started with them. But now, Jacob, he just left. He's an 11-year-old and he plays squash, and we're just bouncing around to various places for him to play. We'd sneak him in to train with the high school, and we'd, go and hit it at Nobles when the coach, who's a friend of mine there, lets him. And, so you really have to hack it together. But Brookline is the perfect city. And squash right now, in the 16, we played 15 other teams. It was a 16-person division. And I think without exception, there were elite private schools. Okay? And then there was us, the public school. And that's sort of, uniform across all of squash. There is the elite private schools, the 200 private schools that do squash, and their kids get recruited into the top colleges to play on their squash teams. And then there's a lot of what's called urban squash programs, which have started. I think Boston has one, and Lawrence has one, and Providence has one. And that caters to, kids, from the urban community that get into the squash programs there. And it's a very select elite. It's almost like you've hit the jackpot if you're one of the 20 kids chosen that year or something like that. But there is no squash in, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, middle class public school in America. And if we could get that started in communities like Brookline, it would be huge. It would transform the game for the better, in my opinion. And it would also be great for the city.
I think of the 150 or so teams that competed last weekend at high school nationals, there were really only about 32 public schools. And Brookline, interestingly, has 3 high school squash teams, ourselves, Beaver Country Day, and also the Dexter Southfield crew. But we're one of the few public schools in New England that hosts a regular continuing squash program.
I believe there's one public school student in all of the Ivies that plays squash this year. Who is the one from Utah?
Stephen?
I just wanted to offer my congratulations as well. And I also wanted to say I really appreciated the play-by-play. And I hope all athletics coaches will follow the model of offering us play-by-play. I wonder if you could share with us a highlight from the girls' squash season as well.
Oh, there were so many. Where is Joya here tonight?
Oh my gosh.
Joya, there's certain terms that are used by squash announcers, like that was an epic battle, or that was a nasty shot. And Joya, I wish she were here, had the most ridiculous return volley. The ball hit the back glass. I thought the ball was lost. She turned around and then picked it up off the back glass and hit it in the front for a winning shot. Of the girls, many, not only from the last weekend's tournament, but throughout the season, where girls matches, you might have been down love 2, and then to come back 2-2 and then take it to 5. That for us, for coaches, it just doesn't get better. When somebody fights back, brings it to 2-2, and then wins the match 11-9 or 13-11. It's and the girls many of them, I think all of them at least had one of those to 5 games. So thank you.
Helen?
Yeah, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to recall when we first started squash in the schools, and I think you started it if I'm not mistaken. Didn't we play where 22 Tappan is now? Wasn't there a squash court there?
Oh, Helen, you're dating yourself.
I'm sorry. I
No,
always do.
no, they're in the basement, not of 22, but in the basement of the Tappan Gym. There was a squash court and there was a racquetball court. And some of us, it was not really used, it was, rec used it a little bit, but some of us teachers who like to play, like we'd have a free period and we'd go hit the ball around and then, wash up and go teach the rest of the day. But when the early on renovation happened, like 88, 89, kind of like a semi-renovation, some of us fought to have those courts maintained, but there was so little interest. I think now it's like part, I think the training facility, and I think it's part of the dance studio.
No, I was talking about the corrugated building that was on the
I
other
don't-
side of the tracks.
Were there squash courts there? I had heard
so.
that, but I don't know that for sure.
think
But
so.
they certainly don't exist now.
No, they're
But
gone.
if there's any will or desire to build squash courts now with our newfound fame here, again, I'm putting it out there to all of you.
It is quite evident that the enthusiasm for squash is palpable. You've convinced me to at least come and watch squash. I have never seen a full match, but now I'm very interested. So I think
Good,
at
thank
least I'll be taking you up on that offer that you mentioned earlier.
Great, thank you.
So congratulations to all of you. Very impressive. Thank you for coming today and sharing your triumph with the school committee as well as the community. There are actually a lot of people who watch these school committee meetings. So thank you again for coming.
And thank you for having us. We would love to stay and be part of the rest of the meeting, but everybody's got to go home to do homework.
We have one more thing before you go. The Public Schools of Brookline would like to present the Spotlight on Excellence Award to the student athletes of the BHS squash teams in celebration of the boys team 2023 U.S. Championship victory, and with gratitude to the squash program for representing BHS and the town of Brookline with honor and distinction. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Why don't the boys come up and get it from you? So Rohan, want to just bring
A
up
quick picture.
So Rohan Sekar is our captain. He played number 5. He played through pain this weekend. He twisted his ankle and insisted on playing the final match and won it.
Yeah, big shout out to Ron for that diagnosis. Should I announce just by number? All right, so first our number 8 was Alec for the tournament. Then our number 7 was Leander. Play number 6 was Javen. And then, as Ron said, I was playing number 5. Playing number 4 was Kieran. Playing number 3 was Frederick. Playing number 2 was Robin. And then play number 1 was Vishnu.
And I should add that 5 of the 8 are sophomores. This is looking good.
Steve, if you can bring them up, let's do a picture with the committee and receive the award.
Everybody's eyes open.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
All right, were there any questions regarding other elements of the superintendent's report or comments? Mariah?
Thank you, David. I just wanted to read one email I got earlier today. I'm going to channel Helen right now, which is that Beep is doing their preschool screenings on Tuesday, March 20. Am I channeling you, Helen? Yes, I am. On Tuesday, March 21st, and people have to sign up by the 14th, which is a week from next Thursday, I think. And they can call 617-713-5473 to make an appointment.
All right, thank you very much for that. Anyone else? All right, then that brings us to public comment. And first up is Siddharth Srivastava.
Hi, I'm Ambika Srivastava. My husband, Siddharth Srivastava. We're FR parents, and we just wanted to talk about a different topic, just in terms of adding like enrichment to the coursework. And our kids are in elementary school, but you know, just thinking about long-term to middle school and high school. So I believe adding enrichment to our school budget is extremely important. Because providing all students with challenging, engaging curriculum will help develop important skills such as hard work, determination, perseverance, resilience, and frustration tolerance. So, for example, you know, just having one of our kids deal with a problem that's difficult and seeing if they can do it and just keep trying and trying even if they can't get it. I think every child deserves to be challenged, motivated to learn and work hard, and perhaps enrichment of the curriculum will help achieve that goal and set them up with skills that will help later on in secondary education and also in career as well. I think we believe, in other parents as well, I believe that all the children should have access to curriculum in elementary school, for example, maybe more engaging science or engineering topics. In middle school, in-depth classes that explore curriculum a little bit more, and then in high school, honors and AP classes. I think any child should be, any child who chooses should be able to take these classes or tackle these classes if they want to, and the school should have adequate funding to maybe provide coaching or extra support to students who may need when they're taking these classes. And that's basically all we wanted to bring up today.
All right, thank you. Our next public comment speaker is Dr. Josko Silobrich. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing her name correctly.
Perfectly fine. Can you all hear me?
We can,
Great,
yes.
Great, great. Well, thank you very much. I really welcome the opportunity to be here this evening with all of you. I was actually, I didn't make any formal, prepare any formal comments, but really wanted to voice my opinion about the importance of and the necessary prioritization of enrichment programs, just as the former, as the previous speaker said. And I would actually advocate for the prioritization, additional prioritization of enrichment programs that are along the more traditional academic disciplines. I think when you look at we live in Brookline. We have a 5th grader, and we've had an experience with both Brookline Public School and with in the more recent years with a private school. And I would say that that one of the differences that we have noticed is the greater availability of enrichment programs, particularly for students who are more advanced and who excel in certain disciplines in private schools. And we have had the experience of reluctantly taking our daughter out of the Brookline Public School and enrolling her into a private school, even though my wife and I, who between us have 5 graduate degrees, we actually went through public school systems and believe in public education, but we found ourselves really, I think, without a real choice, which is unfortunate. And so I think one of the answers, not of course the only answer, but I think one of the answers is in additional prioritization of academics and academic enrichment programs. Thank you very much. I know that the time is short.
Thank you. And that concludes public comment for this evening. That now brings us to presentations and discussions of current issues, FY 2024 budget update, discussion, and possible vote on FY 2024 fees.
So this will be a joint session time between Mariah and myself, but we want to start off by giving an update as to where we stand with with our budgeting timeline. So we are here in the March window where the governor's budget has been presented. And if you'll notice that as a result of that budget, the governor's budget, our new town allocation has been revised, and it's about $2,400 less than where it was a month ago in February. And so, unfortunately, our numbers are going in the wrong direction. At the end of this slide deck, we'll give some updates as to some meetings that are coming up where we will understand this a little bit more. And I shared it at Finance that about what our present understanding is that about 45% of the communities in Massachusetts received less than a 2% increase in the governor's budget. And so Brookline is one of those communities where we did not realize as much as we were hoping for. We'll be discussing this, I think, more in depth when we have our town school partnership meeting next week. So on the horizon, we'll certainly continue our budgeting processes and revisions as such, but recognize now the importance of additional funds more so now than ever. So when we look at revised, and I haven't revised all of the projections, but just to update our new town allocation at 127.002 compared to the 127.005, all what changes is our new gap or our new override requests. I think it's a better terminology. It was initially $3,699,000, and now with that shift, it's pushed it up to the new override request for year one has increased to 3.7, with still our overall bottom line still remains the same, but just that change. So we'll continue to revise our calculations as we go through, and we have provided the administrator with this new number so that it can be factored into the town's numbers. Helen, I see your hand.
Sorry. Yes, thank you. I thought I saw in December the town had originally allocated $127,300,000.
So you are absolutely correct, Helen. So if we go back in December, we were at 127.3. Then we received a revised number in February of 127, so nearly 300, let's call it 320,000 less. And we have since gone down from that.
Right, so we're 321,000 less than what they'd originally told us they would give us.
Correct.
Not small. Okay, and one other quick question. Have we gotten the updated GIC and what is the percentage?
I have not seen that yet, but
Melissa told us mid-March, I believe, right? Lynn?
yeah,
Yeah, this is March.
Mid-March.
mid-March.
Oh,
Mid-March,
okay,
yeah.
Yeah.
thank you.
And so upcoming or on the horizon, Monday, March 6th, we have our, from 3 to 4, we'll have the Town School Partnership meeting. Wednesday, March 8th is a presentation to the school subcommittee for advisory. March 13th, I believe, is a presentation of the school CIP to the Capitals Subcommittee of Advisory. Wednesday, March 15th is the Finance Subcommittee, a review of personnel, as well as a review of building rental fees. And then on the horizon are certainly the additional select board meetings, advisory, full AC, and other school subcommittee meetings. So at this point, I'll pass the mic over to Mariah to fill in any gaps that I may have missed, but then talk about fees.
Thanks, Linus. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, I just switched headsets because Andy told me my voice was breaking up on the other side.
Yeah, it's much better now, Mariah.
Oh, good. That's what happens when you go to wired instead of wireless. The only comment I was going to make on just on the schedule, you don't need to bring it back up, is just to say that for people who are, thinking more about Helen's questions about why we've dropped so much, we're hopeful to get some answers at Town School Partnership on Monday. And certainly there was questions raised last night at Finance, especially given some of the priorities and funding and that have come out of the governor's budget, such as the full funding of out-of-district transportation. We're unclear how our budget is dropping given those fully funded priorities, but hopefully we'll get better understanding on Monday. Okay, I'm gonna pull up the materials on the fees. So yesterday at Finance, we discussed fees. And you all, I believe, have this attachment and the next attachment in your packets. I'm just going to move all the different things Zoom opens out of the way. So this is the proposal for the fees for this year. In general, what you will see is that the fee from FY23 to FY24, mostly the Administration and Finance Office raised the fees by about 3.5%. However, there are exceptions. And so, for example, food services, the rate is greater than that. But as you can see in the second note here, price increases are based on actual food costs and projected food costs. For food services, it's important to note that the state right now is funding the free lunch program. And so these prices would only come into effect if the state does not extend the current waiver. If the current waiver is extended, then free lunch continues. The other important point to make here is that last or 2 weeks ago about PTOs brought up the point that children who are on free and reduced lunch policy now, if they go to get a second lunch, that's not free. And so that lunch isn't federally or reimbursable, we'll say from federal or state funds. But those families are accruing lunch debt for that second lunch. And so we added at this past meeting that for families who are free and reduced, they would have a second lunch also. Right now for everybody, as it says at the top here, everyone gets one breakfast and lunch per day free. And then they pay for the second, but free and reduced would also get the second one free. Are there any, I'm just gonna go through it a little slower just because there's some people who haven't seen this yet. So,
I'm sorry, Mariah,
yeah.
can you say that last point one more time about the
free lunch?
Can you make that last, yeah.
Yeah, I can. And I can't see if anyone has their hands raised or anything, so just interrupt me as I go, like you just did. Good. So basically, the way it works right now is everybody gets a free first lunch. And then you have to pay for your second lunch. What we are proposing for next year, and I'll come back to this year in a minute, we are proposing for next year is that families who are on free and reduced, students who have free and reduced lunch would also be eligible for the second lunch. Currently, those students are actually accruing lunch debt if they are still hungry and go back for a second lunch. Does that make
Thank
sense
you.
now? Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any more questions on lunch? Because I want to bring up one other point.
Mariah, will you make your screen a little larger for us?
I will try. Zoom has decided to put everything in the way. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Yesterday at finance, we also took a motion to retroactively apply the second lunch also free to FY23. That wasn't docketed for today as a motion, so we're going to take that up at, I believe, the next school committee meeting on the 16th. But the subcommittee voted to apply the same policy for the current year. Okay, I'm going to go on to BEEP tuition unless anyone has any questions. BEEP tuition, as I mentioned earlier, there's a 3.5% increase proposed by staff, which Margaret agrees with. We've had extensive conversations about BEEP going to a full day program in 2 years. And so this is a transition tuition, which will be completely revisited as we go to that change of program in the following year. I'm going to keep going unless there's any comments. Base, again, there is a slight increase here. One point is just that music lessons, the range here is up to 905, but they don't actually charge that high right now. They're lower than that. But base often has issues or has in recent history had issues getting enough staff based on the pay rate for music lessons. So they have some ability to work within that range. Next item is the materials fee program. The subcommittee did not actually come up with a recommendation for the tuition or the discount. And so I'm going to pull up the spreadsheet that is very similar to the one we used yesterday in our discussions. I'm going to make it a little bigger. So I'm going to walk you through this a little bit. You can see that the second column here is the materials fee tuition historically. And you can see the next column over is the historical school committee increase voted and the second child discount. The next column over is the total expenditures per pupil as calculated by DESE based on information that PSB provides. Because of the way that the calculations are done, there's essentially, if we wanted to use this to help us understand how we should be thinking about the materials fee rate, there's essentially a 3-year lag. So because this is basically 2 years ago and we're going to the future year. So I kind of color coded it to make it helpful to understand that if we think about taking that 3-year lag into consideration, we could compare the tuition of 2014, 2015 to the 2011, 2012, and it's about 15.4%. If you do that, just going again with that 3-year lag all the way down here, you can see that it's about 15%. There's actually an average here of 15.4% of the average total expenditures. So as we think about what we want to do for materials fee, we have a choice as a committee. The original number that ANF proposed was again based on that 3.5%. That's the $3,332. If you were to think about applying the historical average, that's $3,970, and that's a 15.45% of this increase.
Sorry, Mariah.
Yeah.
Where did that 3.5% come from?
Administration and finance applied it to all of the costs, their recommendation.
Yeah, but
based
isn't
on-
that out of alignment with the historical voted increases
They
for?
did that, they applied that to almost everything here based on sort of increased costs that they're seeing, like generally in terms of other things. Honestly,
I
we
see.
didn't get into why the 3.5%, and we haven't stuck with it in many areas.
Okay.
So, you know, that was just the number that they went with to begin with.
Okay.
And last night, I didn't show this data, but I thought it'd be helpful to people as they were asking what was, for example, if we were to like looking at the different tuition rates, I had said, well, I made a motion because I would like the subcommittee to have come to full committee with a number. I made a motion for $3,500, which failed 2-2. But that's an 8.73% increase over the current tuition of $3,219. You can see the different rates here. So 30,400 is 5.62, 3,600 is 11.84, 3,700, et cetera. I just gave you the price ranges so you could see the increase over the current tuition. So I think that the committee needs to, before we vote the entire fees, we need to make a decision and vote on what we're going to charge for materials fee.
Mariah, one piece I think, I'm sorry, I'm just interrupting, but
Go
one
ahead.
piece I think you left out was that if you look at our average total expenditures, they sort of go up very slowly. And then all of a sudden from 2019 to, 2019 to 2020, it went up $4,000, which is quite an increase. And I think that's somewhat, it's not, it's real money for what was then, but it's the ARPA funds that really.
No, that's not what's going on. What's going on is that.
Help me.
Yeah, sure. What's going on is that the number of students dropped. And so this is a per pupil expenditure. And so it's my expectation that our per pupil expenditure, two things. One is that if we were to use this model going forward, thinking about a historical average, that next year, again, we would see probably a very small increase. And then again, we would apply a very small increase. Or we can decide that, as you say, it's a relatively large year-to-year increase. And so oops, sorry, I didn't mean to click on everything. And so we decide to do some smaller amount. And again, I'm providing some of the options here or some other number that people choose to do. But you're right, it did go up year on year, a relatively large amount.
Mariah, or anyone else from that meeting, would anyone care to share their rationales for voting as they did? Or David, do you want to have that conversation now?
We can. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, so I was one of the two who voted against such a large increase last year, meaning voted against Mariah's motion to raise it by 8.7%, mainly because I think that families make major life decisions based on a reasonable expectation that the materials fee won't rise suddenly dramatically. And if there was some real urgency to save the program, then that would be one thing. But this rationale seems to me far too abstract to justify a sudden large hike. So I would much rather go with the 3.5 that's being applied almost everywhere else.
Anyone else?
I'll comment on why. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mariah, and then Suzanne.
I was just going to say that I made the motion for 3,500 as opposed to the 3,900 because I think that while the fraction is relatively large, we're actually talking about $1 increase of a very small amount. And I think that the reality is that PSB is in clearly a very large financial need. And I think that we should use this kind of model going forward because this is about the materials. The name of the program is materials fee, and we should be thinking about the true cost of materials per student. So I would like to see us apply not necessarily the original proposed fraction, which itself is relatively abstract, but something that's based on, even if it doesn't fully achieve the vision of covering the cost of materials, that it gets us close to that and also acknowledges the financial reality of the district.
Suzanne?
Yeah, thank you. I'm struggling a little bit with this. I'm not sure the materials have actually gone up as much because most of our costs are in salaries. So if, we're asking our staff to chip in on materials, again, that even 8% feels like a big jump to me to ask of our staff. I mean, that we are providing them a wonderful opportunity and benefit. And so I want to make sure that it is still viewed that way. I could probably live with a 3,400, or which is a 5.6. Is that
Correct.
I could probably live with that. I did vote for 3.5% last night at finance.
We didn't vote on the 3.5%.
Well, what did we vote for?
We voted for 30. We voted on the 3,500, and you voted against it.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Got it.
Would anyone else like to be heard on this question of the fee increase?
Can I ask a further question? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Stephen.
What's the true cost of this difference? Is there a way to estimate the total true cost of the difference between the 3.5% and 8.73%?
It's $168, $3,500.
No. Total to the district per year.
135 times roughly 200. So
Thanks.
yeah, 27,000 or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we need someone to make a motion for a dollar amount.
Well, can I move the 3.5%, see where that goes? And
Yep.
we would, of course, Mariah, keep in mind this model, I think, and try to see if we can apply it next year when the relevant year won't be such an outlier as 2020 was.
Okay.
Right?
What do you mean by that, Andy?
Well, as Helen was pointing out, the year that we're kind of looking at, 3 years past, it was an extreme outlier in terms of the sudden jump in per pupil expenditure. So if we're going to start following Mariah's concept here, I just don't think this is the year to.
Andy, I would just point
rethinking it
out
that
though,
way.
that say next year it's 26,000 for the per pupil expenditure. And then next year, is everyone going to balk again?
Well, did it actually sort of stay that high, or could it have gone down again? We don't know. We don't know yet, right?
I have
Because our student numbers did begin to recover.
They did. I'd have a sense that it's probably not going to, well, I shouldn't comment on what I think it might be. Anyways, I think that that's an approach.
Okay. Anyway, my motion is for the 3.5%.
I'm sorry. Forgive me. I'm still confused. The total cost that you just estimated, Mariah, was per pupil, not for the district, right?
The $27,000 is what would happen if you vote for the A and F.
Yes, but the
proposed amount.
$27,000 is not the total cost to the district.
Of what?
That it's the total cost to the average total expenditures per pupil represents what?
Represents the total expenditures divided by the number of pupils in district.
I think Stephen's question
I'm
is
asking
in
what's the
the
total expenditure.
in the aggregate, what's the difference between applying the 3.5% increase and the 8.73% increase?
Yeah, don't divide it by pupils. What's the total difference? in expenditures?
$27,000. $27,000. Basically, you would get an additional 100 and whatever it is. Now I'm not even sure I'm doing my math right. It's 168 times 200.
The difference is $27,000 for the district.
Right.
Okay, thank
Additional
you.
revenue for the district.
Thanks.
I think I did my math wrong. It's 168 times roughly 200.
Okay.
All right, so Andy has a motion on the table for the 3.5% increase. Is there a second?
Sure, I'll second that.
Thank you, Suzanne. Helen, your vote?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
Mariah?
No.
Stephen?
No.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And I also vote yes.
Okay, so going back to the document. One other thing is that more recently, there's been a 10% discount. It says for second child, I'm presuming for second children and past that. And we didn't discuss that portion at the meeting, but we should probably actually take a vote on it now. And is there someone who wants to make a motion on the percentage discount for?
I move that we do 10% again this year.
Okay. David, are you taking the vote?
Yes. Stephen.
Second.
Oh, yes, we need a second. So Suzanne seconds. Stephen, your vote?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
Mariah?
No.
And I also vote yes.
Okay, so now just imagine that this says the 3.5%, which is the 3,332 and the 10% there. Next item is the international tuition program. In subcommittee 2 weeks ago, we talked about, we were trying to find out if that program, basically to get a little bit more information. It hasn't been running for a couple of years. So for example, what it costs to be a part of the SEVIS, which is basically the visa program. So the current cost is $3,000, but the district international student coordinator doesn't feel at this time it makes sense to reinitiate the program. And the China exchange program, which as Steve Lantos said earlier, the actual travel portion of the exchange wouldn't happen for the upcoming year either. So right now, this is sort of not a relevant fee for the upcoming year, but still we'll list it here. Lost books hasn't changed. One just noticed that we're not just dealing with lost books anymore, but things like laptop chargers. So in the near future, there's probably going to be a request from administration and finance to update the name of this revolving fund. Middle school extramurals. I realized that actually I made a mistake last night because I wanted to discuss that A&F rolled both programs ahead by 3.5%, but the actual staff recommended that the programs have the same charge to them. And so I would actually like to, I would like to propose an amendment to what we voted last night, which is to make them the same charge of $104, which is what the staff had recommended.
Would that also include indoor soccer? I can't remember.
No, there's a note here that, because we'd asked about that.
It was eliminated.
last.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
They've changed that to the intramural. They have 4 different options for intramural activities instead, which don't carry a charge.
And Mariah, remind me, they use the same number of days on court or no?
My understanding is that the programs, there was some discussion of this, but essentially the volleyball, like the program has become more substantial, and yes, it basically carries the same cost, whether it's referees or whatever else.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I have to, I don't remember all the details, but I do remember that they have the same cost more or less. So I made that motion. David, can we just do that now? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, to make them the same cost.
Okay, I'll second it. Stephen, your vote?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
And I also vote yes.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if we go to the next page. Sorry, this is dancing around. Okay. Next item is athletics. We had a long discussion about the high school athletics fee, and basically it came down to the ongoing review, and until they have a justification to increase the fee, which they'd like to do as part of a larger discussion around what the program needs are and what the program expenses are, they'd like to hold the fee in place. The other thing that we just talked about, and you can see that there's a note over here that fee collection has been at 75% because they've been only doing like checks collection, but they are about to start to be able to take online payment, and there is the full expectation that that will greatly increase the revenue that they're collecting as well. So the committee was in favor of leaving it as is and letting them do their work and then coming back to it next year. Summer programs, again, it's a 3.5% increase roughly. The one change is that we put the label of here of maximum dollars. And the reason for that is because the summer school programs, I believe, are typically 5 weeks. And my understanding from Jen Martin, who's the current summer programs coordinator, is that they're looking at some shorter programs as well that might be of interest for students who don't want to spend 5 weeks but would be interested in a shorter program. And so these these rates would be prorated to the shorter amount of dollars. So that's why we have, or to the lower amount of dollars. So that's why it's maximums now. Visual arts, again, is more or less the increase. Same thing for culinary. Same thing for the student restaurant, Tappan Green. Bus transportation, we have fees in here, but again, this just a reminder that we have a plan to eliminate this if the override request is approved. Use of school buildings, we're going to vote this separately in a future meeting. I just want to give a quick recap that after our March 1st presentation at Finance about building fees, the extended day directors shared their own thoughts on it. And I had a meeting with them 2 days ago, which I talked about last night at Finance. I won't go into detail here, but there's some other work that is going to happen between staff and me, and we'll go back to Finance before we vote that any further. And then the last two fees that we're going to discuss tonight, there's this academic testing fee, which we do not actually control the cost. These are set, but since we charge them, they're set by College Board, but since we charge them, they're on this tracker. And China Exchange.
Sorry, Mariah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just curious, the use of school buildings as a fee, I thought in our last all school committee conversation, we had been talking about the possible subsidization of after school programs. This would seem the opposite of that.
Subsidization. I'm not sure what you're referring
Yeah,
to.
we were when Lauren Bernard made her public comment about equity and after school programs, that triggered a conversation about, is that on Mariah's end? Yeah. That triggered a conversation about the possible subsidization of after school programs as a possible future priority of the school committee, if not for this year, then for a future year. So I'm curious about what the fee would be pertaining to the use of school buildings around after school programming.
So I'm not sure about exactly what you mean about the conversation relating to Lauren. But this is about,
maybe we're not that school committee meeting.
maybe I wasn't, or maybe I just can't remember.
In any case,
yeah.
I'm still curious what the fee would be pertaining to.
So the fee has to do with the use of buildings and basically after hours custodial support and so forth.
Huh, okay, thanks.
Yeah. And this is something that's been in place since the 2015 override and was part of the agreement during the override to and that's, but we can talk about that, and maybe you want to come to the next finance meeting, or I can fill you in on separately, unless other people are also curious.
I can be patient. Thanks, Mariah.
Okay. Academic testing fees, again, those are set by College Board, but we're listing them since we charge them. And China Exchange, as mentioned earlier, isn't this says this program is anticipated to restart in FY24. It should say FY25, or isn't anticipated, either way. So that's the fees document, and I think we just need a vote. So I'm going to make a motion to accept it as amended tonight.
All right, Andy, you want to second that?
Yes.
Okay. Your vote, Stephen?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
And I also vote yes.
Can I also just say thank you, Mariah, for presenting this so clearly?
I hope it was clear. I apologize. It's so much content, but thank you. That's kind of you to say.
Oh, it was an excellent presentation. Thank you for taking us through that.
Thanks.
All right, that now brings us to our next presentation and discussion of current issues, which will be the culture of equity in the public schools of Brookline.
Great. Hello, everyone. It's good to see you all. And thank you, Dr. Guillory, for sharing screen. Hi, Helen. Thank you so much. Awesome. So hello, everyone. Yes, I am Janae Utaro, Senior Director, and glad to be back here 1 month to the day of my entry plan presentation for this role 1 year ago. Many people in our community have had the chance to meet my amazing partner who started in the district 8 months ago, and I will let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hayon Ko, Assistant Director. This is my first year in the public schools of Brookline, and it's been a wonderful experience working with Janae and learning about PSB culture. We're calling this presentation The Culture of Equity in PSB, Challenges and Next Steps. While we don't name it here, we'll also cover a few of the highlights. Janae is going to run through our purpose and the next few slides, and we look forward to your comments and questions at the end.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Giller, you can move the slide. Awesome. So the purpose of this presentation, and just so everybody knows, we have about 17 slides, and we're going to run through them in about a half hour. So the first purpose is to update on our approach and goals for educational equity. The second is to offer insights on the work this year, the highlights, as Hayoung mentioned, and ongoing challenges for sure. And third, we just want to partner in seeing the system anew. So we'll share some boundaries and the road ahead. Dr. Giller, you can move this slide. Thank you so much. So speaking of seeing the system anew, a guiding and well-loved text for us has been Ron Heipitz's The Practice of Adaptive Leadership. I'm holding it up here so everybody can see. And it's so the tools and tactics for changing your organization and the world. We feel it's one of the most important texts for any leader who has to lead a system where you are expected to change things. And we learn from Heifetz that adaptive leadership is the leadership of disappointing people at a pace that they can handle. And so Heifetz says here, to diagnose a system or yourself while in the midst of action requires the ability to achieve some distance from those on the ground events. We use the metaphor of getting on the balcony above the dance floor to depict what it means to gain the distance perspective you need to see what is really happening. So last year was some of that as objective as we possibly could observing, which Dr. Guillory wisely requested early on. And within that was my entry planning and our continuing diagnosing, interpreting, strategizing, intervening, and reviewing of our efforts. And so this is the iterative decision-making process of adaptive leadership, and it's our chosen approach to the work. Thank you, Dr. Guillory. So you may remember this image, our DBIE spectrum from last year, designed by Dr. Darnisa Amante Jackson, who's a mentor of mine through the Mass Association of School Superintendents and the founder of the Disruptive Equity Education Project. We use this spectrum as a communication and diagnostic tool. It's how we define and chart our course in PSB. So as a quick review, you'll remember the purpose of diversity all the way to the left is to get people comfortable talking about and to each other as people outside of work and school. It's not diversification by race or gender or ability. It asks the question, how have we created as a system a space for people to be able to talk about themselves as people beyond work? And the goal of diversity is to build empathy. So many of us have not had a chance to talk to each other, whether we're educators or caretakers, you name it, about who we are as people. We assume. Belonging, the second one there, is the bridge to inclusion. It's the sweet spot, we like to say. Belonging is creating a space for differing cultures, identities, and beliefs to be represented. The goal is about creating opportunities and spaces for people to tell you what they need in a new way to be seen. We often, in each of our schools, ask people to change, adapt, revise, conform, melt in whatever ways for our culture. Inclusion, which is third there, is centering marginalized groups. It's all about perspectives. It's where we do diversification. And then finally, equity is understanding that because of marginalization, different people need more. It considers which groups, such as in the classroom, for example, may be marginalized and may need to see more examples of their identity and cultures in the curriculum. So we're thinking examples include students of color or students with varying disability or needs. Equity requires also understanding the structures and systems that are currently in place or not in place to that prevent certain voices or students, parents, et cetera, from being present during the design and planning of curriculum and teaching practices. Dr. Giller, you can.
Janae. So what does saying yes to, thank you, Dr. Giller, the next, thank you. So what does saying yes to leading and being a part of equity work look like in PSB? First, we're being asked to do two different things at the same time. This graphic comes from the practices of adaptive leadership. Heifetz says in order to be successful in doing culture change, you got to do two things with the system. The first one is technical. The second one is transformative. With technical challenges, our questions are, have we created the core competencies? Do we actually know what people have to learn in order to do equity here? So this one would look like developing professional development or identifying books and resources, getting training. Technical work in a district starts by creating core competencies for equity. We actually have a list of skills that we are saying educators need to have in order to actually do equity work. For us right now, those skills are being co-created with leaders and educators within our teaching and learning and student services departments. The most important piece here, though, is that the technical work of the SAI says if we do not have a plan for learning, nothing changes. Because equity is not just a mindset, it is instructional practice. Equity done well in a classroom is differentiation, not just baseline differentiation, but with the lens of relevance, because we know who our students are. Equity done well also looks like scaffolding, identifying student needs in curriculum and in classrooms, linguistic equity and decoding. And finally, there's classroom management, using restorative practices. Thanks again to our SCL partners like Dr. Matt Dubois and our tireless K-12 curriculum coordinators and educators in the trenches working in their practice. We share this because a lot of people don't realize equity actually has baseline competency and skills for teachers and educators.
Thanks, Hae-Young. The second piece, so I'm sorry, Dr. Giller, we're still on that one slide, almost done there. The second piece, and so this is the sort of the bucket to the right there. The second piece is things that we're doing to shift mindset, and this is harder, right? Hae-Young and my work here, along with other equity leaders, is to create a culture where our educators and administrators are actually sitting in the learning. It takes time. The difference with technical and adaptive is, as an example, let's say we've done a professional development on scaffolding. The transformation adaptive work is we have now built PLCs, also known as professional learning communities, or we're using grade level team time to have teachers continuously practicing scaffolding in those grade level teams or in department teams. This work is how we hold people accountable. And so adaptive work looks like evaluations that are actually checking if that learning is being used. It looks like the creation of spaces for conversation, affinity space, which we'll talk more about, and we've heard a lot about in school committee the last several months. It might be collaboration or common planning time where teachers can talk about their feelings of not necessarily knowing how to make lesson plans relevant for English language learners. We believe that if we don't actually give adults a space to sit in all the biases they discover in their practice as we help them learn, we never get there. And this is the both and of equity work. So take a look again. Number one, It is a planned structure to help teachers learn, so they're impacting the instructional core in classrooms. And number two, it's our ability to create transformative conversation spaces. That is the only way that educators apply their learning, is when we give them space and time, as we've said, to sit in it and grapple with it and talk about it and actually have to build relationships with students, do student engagement work, do parent engagement work. Thank you, Dr. Guillory. So in this next slide, what does equity call PSB leaders, educators to do in schools? Well, we are simply demonstrating here that we actually have to understand what our students need and what adults need. So number one here is saying we actually have to be creating cultures of data. A giant shortcoming of our office is that there's no one who is continuously capturing data from our buildings. We haven't had the time, and our data and strategy department is stretched. As a result, we're not yet equitable. We don't even have the conditions yet to really do it. We'll return to the topic of data and data sources a little later in the presentation, but we know that it is incomplete. And we know that as equity leaders, we must have partnership with district leaders who own data. And incidentally, I just wanted to say here too that DESE is now updating the standards. Some people may know this, that next year administrators are going to be evaluated on their ability to use data to drive strategic planning. Last year, I asked the question about our demographic data. I said that we need to understand who we actually have here in PSB. Do we all know exactly who's here? I raised the issue of discipline data, retention data. We talked about MCAS data, as we know, and graduation data. In my and other presentations, such as Casey No-Miller's from the Office of Student Services, last year we referenced IEP culture and special education data, including disproportionality and over and underrepresentation, pathways, our culture climate survey data. So our qualitative data culture includes student climate, conditions for school effectiveness, panorama belonging survey data, and family and community engagement. I list all of those, and we elevate all of these because of the importance of all of these pieces of evidence, because we do not want to be strategizing from a lot of hearsay when we talk about equity in Brookline. The other part of number one is the culture of creating belonging for adults, understanding adult need. So our educators actually should have strategies for them to feel connected and belonged to each other and to us. We can do this by creating staff belonging surveys, staff activities, adult affinity, yay, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, exit interviews to understand how adults experience our buildings. Exit interviews are our friends, and we've been talking about this a lot. And because we, as we all know, we are trying to hire educators of color, but we don't know why our staff of color who were already here left. There are real toxic things happening to adults, and we ask them to ignore that on behalf of kids, and quite honestly, often they cannot. Can you move the slide, Dr. Guillory? So a quick look here at what we've been saying and what we are working on. Equity leaders are successful when we are identifying root cause ideological issues that create non-belonging. Okay, so for example, I can flag something, that something exists here. I'm creating a strategy to help shift that belief. Equity leaders, not just the two of us, but we are the beacons and systemic planners right now of maximizing relationships. Drive best practices on how to make everyone feel included. This is what the instructional core is based off of, and we're trying to impress upon our colleagues that it is critical for us to understand how identity is connected to best practices in classrooms. Dr. Guillory, can you move the slide? Briefly, number two here reminds us we must keep a sharp eye on instructional practice. As we've said, equity's goal, and Hae-Young just mentioned this, is the highest level of differentiation in a classroom. It is saying there are kids who are here who are neurodiverse, who are of color, who are of low socioeconomic status. Equity is saying, regardless of what the inequity is in our district and schools, our educators need to have a pulse on it. And then finally, number 3, we are not just here to create instructional strategies and to help build relationships with students and families. We are here to help our system change its policies. We know that the reason that students continue to not have what they need is usually because of policies that exist or don't yet exist. I'm really grateful for the DEIJ subcommittee, by the way, that is thinking hard about our policies and involving a couple of dynamic BHS students along the way. So shout out to the DEIJ subcommittee. We are committed to unearthing how our policies and processes impact students. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Janae. So you've heard us say it, and we'll highlight these pieces for everyone now. Our professional learning is about building skills in schools. We ask ourselves and our colleagues what capacities have been built to better equip people to handle equity issues. Just to share, some of our facilitated Office of Equity professional learning topics this year explored the impacts of white supremacy culture characteristics on our teaching and learning and the well-being of our students and ourselves. We also look at subtle discrimination interruptions, for example, and we continue to examine culturally responsive pedagogy and culturally affirming SEL. Sometimes the PD takes us through healing-centered engagement strategies, or we consider racial identity development theories. In addition, the last several months have allowed us to be thought partners with our K-8 colleagues on what we call willful refusal to learn. This is an idea from Herbert Cole and Joe Feldman's Grading for Equity. These are just a few examples. The work is a bit of everything under the broad umbrella of building the competencies necessary for transformation. We'll pause here for a minute so you can take a look. By the way, by whole school faculty meetings, we are indicating our 8 K-8, K-8 schools, the high school, and BEEP. So that's all of our early education educators from the 6 BEEP location. Next slide, please, Dr. Guillory. Thank you. We're particularly proud of our ongoing national SEED project work, both district-wide with and for educators, administrators included. As you can see, there are 10 seminars happening monthly throughout PSB. Again, we want to emphasize the importance of the adult equity work, which is 80% of the needed focus when we talk about the impacting a system. Also in January, we launched Seed for Caregivers, and there are approximately 30 parents participating, which is really exciting. The connection to the learning happening with educators and separately and together with students is critical that families are also learners and partners alongside us. We're incredibly pleased about Seed for Caregivers. Thank you to our 4 facilitators, the Brookline Education Foundation, and the MECO program for making this possible. You can also see the well-attended first time ever adult affinity spaces for educators, in which 11 colleagues were trained to lead this past fall and then launched the groups also 2 months ago in January. Next slide, please. So we offer insight on various community collaborations on this slide to remind you that the technical challenge work is for all of us. The set of adult collaboration is not an exhaustive list. However, I will say we are proud of ongoing and new partnerships with Dr. Josephine Kim from Harvard. That partnership began last year and involves our office and the Office of English Learner Education with Director Mindy Paolo. For new collaborations, there is Dr. Juliana Chen of Cartwheel Co., also with Dr. Matt Dubois, who's working with our educators and parent caregivers community to learn ways to provide culturally responsive care and mental health support to our students. Also, Dr. Cindy Liu from Brigham and Women's Hospital is working specifically with our high school students around stress management, complementing the stress resilience work students are already doing with our school counseling teams. Next slide, please. Based on the universal screening data that Dr. Matt Dubois shared, which you are all familiar with, part of our efforts this year were focused on partnering to create AAPI student affinity groups in the K-8 schools and at the high school. This year is the first time we are piloting AAPI LEAP, which stands for Leadership and Affinity Program at the high school. Sid Ho, a 9th grade social studies teacher, and I are running 2 advisory sections, planning for an expansion next year. In addition, in the K-8 schools, and this is really important, we have 2 AAPI student affinity lunch groups meeting at the Baker School and Heath School run by dedicated educators.
Thank you. So thanks, Hae-young. In thinking about the student work, and as referenced earlier, the areas of study we need to leverage now to understand the challenges our students and community face are listed here. In many ways, this is the tip of the iceberg, right? Some of you will remember this slide from last year, although we have updated it to include course enrollment and promotion data, as well as family and culture climate data. At a very baseline level, strict attention and study around existing data, what we already collect, to see how disparities due to race or class or others show up, and then looking at data that might not yet be collected. That is current realities for our students and families. This informs and will inform our adult work, allow us to progress monitor and grow in concrete ways as educators in our individual cultural proficiency. This is the work that we as leaders in the Office of Equity need to do, and work our colleagues at various levels of the public schools of Brookline need to do. We're still just scratching the surface. So what are our most entrenched challenges?
On this slide, I'd like to point us to the graphic on the left-hand column by Insight Education Group that lays out the structures and layers of creating powerful and sustainable improvements. Undoubtedly, there are challenges that we face in creating lasting technical and adaptive transformation work. Some of the challenges that hinder us, both as leaders and community members, from having powerful, sustainable improvements in our district, following the self-reflection work, which we are absolutely and clearly doing, is that we are not analyzing and interpreting data that we have collected in a way that informs and changes our practice. Therefore, our action planning steps do not clearly lead to sustainable improvements.
So challenge number 1 in our minds, as you can see to the right there, is that Hae-young and I regularly encounter the reality that as a system, we adults are trying to create new culture on top of culture that already exists. And we are still early in understanding the power of culture and academic achievement. Last year, we described that PSB is inequitable by design. And when I use that term or that phrase, I think of what was historically the brick and mortar of our American school systems. But even today, these design elements are hardwired into our Brookline schools, resistant to superficial changes. So we often don't look at those institutional elements as part of our equity inquiry and conversations. Instead, and here's my point about sort of the existing culture, we keep thinking that Brookline schools once worked, got broken at some point, and now we need to fix them. The reality is our system is doing exactly what it was designed to do from the beginning, which is to churn out inequitable outcomes that create racial stratification, in terms of who's college and career ready, just as an example. And this is a hard truth that many people don't want to acknowledge when we start having the equity conversation. To further make my point here, and I'll be quick, I'll just going to cite a moment in our seed group for administrators just a couple weeks ago, where we were doing a deep dive into sexual identity. And we pondered a simple yet loaded question. And again, this is administrators. Does PSB balance how people self-identify and celebrate their identities with how heterosexism oppresses queer and LGBTQIA plus people? You know, the question is, does PSB focus more on one than the other? Do we do so much around celebrating and, you know, honoring and never doing the dismantling? We came to the conclusion that we do a great job doing new and improved work to match our learnings. We do less well in the areas of simultaneously dismantling systemic inequities, hence new culture on top of the old. The second challenge Hae-young addressed already in talking about the graphic. In particular, though, and you can note the sub-bullet, in the Office of Educational Equity, we need to be better partners and drivers of this work. To start, we are interested in consulting with Harvard's DataWise in Action program. Dr. Guillory and I have talked a little bit about this. Several PSB administrators participated in DataWise in 2016 and loved it. A number of those folks have moved on. This year, we're looking at what it would look like to build a small team, including the two of us, to learn more, to then strategically lead collaborative data inquiry and truly honor our district's belief that all children and the adults that serve them deserve to be held to high expectations for continuous growth. So the application for DataWise is at the end of June. It's June 29th. And the cost for a team of 7 is approximately $12,500. They're a lot cheaper than they were, which is crazy. That never happens. The training is 8 months long and would serve as a direct support to Hugsies, so the Harvard Graduate School of Education, their RIDES program, and their equity improvement cycle. RIDES stands for Reimagining Integration, Diverse and Equitable Schools, and we will speak briefly about our thinking connected to adopting the improvement cycle in some of our work here in PSB in just a minute.
As a department, we constantly plant the seeds. We have yet to synchronize, concretely measure, and further support sustained shifts in educator practice. This is a piece we care a great deal about. More on our plans to do this in a clear and, in fact, smart way in the months and years ahead. Speaking of specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-sensitive, aka SMART priorities, we share finally on this slide that establishing these equity and inclusion priorities and then ensuring that they are integrated into the district's strategic plan in a way that inspires and moves educators and families to make meaningful change. Something that Janae and I hear all the time and agree is true. We all say we are committed to equity, but don't have a common definition or way of understanding how inequity impacts our schools. Janae visited this idea about our culture that exists on top of the slide. Challenge number 4 will allow us to address this systematically. And again, it is part of our charge and work.
Thank you, Dr. Guillory. Next slide, please. So briefly, and we're almost done, everybody's thinking about healthy boundaries. This felt important for us to talk about. Ron Heifetz does not talk about race or gender or sexual identity, but he does talk about loss. And you'll recall that our DBIE spectrum from slide 2 does this too. So as the district appointed equity leaders in Brookline, Hae-young and I are leading strategies that trigger loss in people. And that's why boundaries are important. So we want to highlight what healthy boundaries look like for us in the Office of Educational Equity and what we need and plan to do so that the PSB community can support the two of us and this shared work. So establishing necessary communication with leaders to understand best what we need to be successful is obviously something that we're thinking a lot about. Part of this work is unpacking one of the most compelling of the 15 characteristics of white supremacy culture that Hae-young talked about that we do PD around, right? And that one of those is what we call a sense of urgency. And this is a point that school leaders brought up as an issue they also feel impacts so many of us here. This characteristic describes a continued sense of urgency to solve problems and fix things. And that makes it difficult to be inclusive and encourage democratic and thoughtful decision-making, think long-term, or consider consequences. We as equity leaders also need to manage people's expectations with realistic work plans, reminding them what DBIE work in Brookline is versus what it isn't. Our hope is that individuals in our districts will see themselves as equal equity partners in the shared district vision and not look to our department for solutions with a blank slate, but rather act as co-conspirators in dismantling inequities that exist within the educational experience here. And finally, we need to leverage our job descriptions. This is a plan that we have to kind of rewrite these and secure appropriate financial resources to support the teams and teaming. And that is, so teams are the educators, caregivers, students. Equity is about teams. And that's what equity inclusion requires of us here. And that's for our health and safety. This is what we're hoping that the community can support us in terms of this part of the work. Next slide and final slide, almost final slide. Thank you, Dr. Guillory. So finally, to give you a sense of the road ahead, as promised on the first slide of the presentation, we close with a look at our final slide that demonstrates the RIDE's equity improvement cycle. We love this because it offers a structured improvement process that allows us to plan and implement small, specific gains in areas that we, as members of the community, and Hae-Young and myself, choose it as important. So in addition to the 6 steps that you're seeing detailed on the screen, we are excited with strategic support to help our colleagues, one, draw on multiple sources of data and multiple perspectives in analyzing and discussing that data. And the second thing is we're excited to see the advantages of a structured process, knowing that that will lead to small wins and that it builds capacity for deeper and further equity work. And third, we're constantly applying a systemic approach, as we've mentioned, that involves first the classroom, then our schools, and then the system. This is because that journey to an equitable school district is a personal one as well as an organizational one. Number 4, we learn the work by doing the work. We really strongly believe that. By the way, we develop a sense of shared efficacy as well when we do that. By incorporating key reflective steps along the way, we actually get better as we work together. So the last thing, number 5, is that we continuously learn and reflect on the process using what we're calling after action reviews. A final note here is that Hae-Young and I have relationships with Dr. Lee Title. Some of you may know Dr. Lee Title from Harvard and Dr. Darnisa Amante Jackson, who I've mentioned earlier. They have created powerful resources for each of the 6 steps on the equity improvement cycle. And I have been fortunate enough to receive coaching last year and this year on how to implement it for equity issues on which we choose to focus, like curriculum or classroom practices or belonging.
The center circle takes us back to where we began tonight. Our diagnostic view from the balcony and above the dance floor is that the culture of equity in PSP is one of initial and continued development. It is personal, and we must also embark upon it as a team.
Okay, yes, this is hard, important work that involves all of us, as we've said, and we encourage and thank everyone on this call and the community members listening for being essential players in this work alongside us. And so with that, Dr. Guillory, you can advance the slide. We will take your comments and questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Any questions, comments from school committee members? Andy?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. That was great. I guess my question would be, so you talked about how we're falling short in gathering and analyzing data so that you even sort of know what you're confronting. What exactly are the resources that we need to put in to sort of get you what you need? And sort of, are we sort of failing to collect the data at all, or are we failing to mine it, or are we failing to analyze it? Like, at what stage are we not getting it done?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So a couple things come to mind for me when I speak of the importance of the two of us in the Office of Equity sort of leading this work around equity. We have not found that we have the time to really do some of that work. We're busy out in schools, doing any number of things from running PD and having a number of conversations. There's some fires and things like that. There's a lot that's happening for the two of us. So we have yet to sort of carve out the time and space. And my reference to data-wise is also something that's going to be really helpful to us. I will fully admit that I don't do such a great job. And so, Andy, I will say a lot of that data is being collected. You know, we know from presentations this school year alone, we've got amazing data from our panorama survey data and, you know, on and on. There are different, our MCAT, there's just so much data that's there. What I'm finding, we're seeing is that we're not doing, to use your word, we're not doing a great job of mining, really interpreting that data, and then making the connection from what that data is revealing to us to how that sort of informs and shapes our practice. And we could, and I'll speak for myself, I think Kayan would agree, we and several other leaders in the district could really use a refresher via a group like DataWise and how to sort of cultivate these inquiry cycles around the data that we're seeing and making those concrete adjustments to our practice in the classroom. So I would say a couple things. We need the time. We're still trying to figure out how to get the time. As I mentioned, everybody's running on all cylinders, and it would be really helpful to sort of reset and get that support and that infusion, if you will, from this team at Harvard.
Okay, but the underlying data, for example, like, you know, breakdowns for discipline, retention, course enrollment, that information is there.
Absolutely.
If only you had the time and space to pull it out and think about it.
Absolutely. It's been there. I think, as I mentioned earlier, there's the data that we have historically collected that we already collect. And what we're starting to find is there's these whole pieces of data and worlds of data that we have yet to collect and then interpret and apply. So we're interested in really doing a much better job with what we already have, and then pieces that we have yet to look at, especially post-pandemic.
But I have a similar follow-up question to Andy. So a lot of the specific categories you mentioned regarding data gathering, I believe we've had presentations that show that data at least on a basic level above categorizations. So are there specific areas where we don't even have the data collected that you would like for us to try to develop a mechanism by which to gather that data?
So it's a great question. And Mariah, I don't know if you remember, right toward the end of last spring, you and Aaron and I sat down to sort of really think about our programmatic data. So thinking about our different sort of demographic groups and thinking even about the high school. So which of our Steps to Success students, as an example, are, participating in various programs at the high school, and what does that look like over time? And what does that look like in terms of their academic performance, their social emotional development? So I could go on and on, David, about different areas that we think about as we run into our students and our families, and just pieces that we know for a fact we haven't spent time really thinking about. And again, Mariah and I and Aaron came up with the list, and we were going to try to get going on that. And once again, a lot of things sort of trumped and we ran out of time. I will say that we're having some conversations with Tam to sort of think about what we can get going to sort of pull some of that data pre-pandemic and during and post.
Thank you. Suzanne?
Yeah, thank you, Janae, very much. So, one place to go that's just quick and easy is the mass report card from DESE.
Yep.
So, there's actually a fair amount of information there, and they do compare the different demographic groups.
Yeah.
So, so as you said, it's not having the data and getting it, it's having the time, I think, as you said, to really, as Andy said, mine the data and to have those conversations about it, right? That's what I'm hearing you're saying, is the conversations.
Right.
So I am a little excited about a shift in culture in our primary grades, where they're looking at their M-class data and having conversations about where our students are in terms of skill sets around reading and literacy, and but the piece that's exciting to me is that they're coming together at particular times to talk about it. And because I think, I think that's what I'm hearing from you, and I think that's what I believe in, is those conversations about what we see that will move us forward in forming our instruction. I mean, is
Right.
that, yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, I don't love myself using the term, but I'll say it. I think we have been looking at data. In some ways, I'd say we've been navel gazing, you know, admiring the problem as we look at the data. What we've struggled to do, I feel, as a system is sort of translate what we're seeing into the change, the sustained response, interventions, whatever you want to use, as a result of the data. And sometimes we see the same sort of data all the time. And we often, and I mentioned this point about it becomes hearsay if we don't actually have it to look at and do that comparing and saying things like, you know, we hear often, we have, you know, very few educators of color in the district. Well, certainly that's true. And yet if you look at some of the numbers, you know, those are starting to ratchet up. So just as an example, I think being able to report out about what the work has been and how that data is showing the impact of our efforts feels really important. But I love that you brought up the M-Class data and what's happening in these conversations with teachers. It's really taking off and doing wonderfully.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those efforts.
Valerie?
Thank you. Thanks, Janae, for the presentation. When you were talking about the new culture on top of old, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and thinking about how to dismantle the old while cultivating the new.
So I talk a lot, Hae Young and I talk a lot about this idea that we call scarf threats. And it's really about taking a look at, you know, who have we been prior to this point as a community? What was Brookline like as a town, and then as a school system, you know, years and years and years ago? And how are some of those beliefs and values and priorities still true in 2022, 23, 24, 2024, we're not there yet, but you know what I mean? And what of that still impacts the ways we go about things, the ways we teach, the ways in which we center voices in our curriculum, the ways we build relationship. So sometimes our not paying so much attention to where we've been, but more saying, oh my gosh, this is where we are now. So let's put on top of the old, these new ways of thinking, these new ways of being, without really doing a deep dive into looking at how we got here and who we are, and some of those fundamental changes that we need to sort of think about that dictate the decisions that we're making now. And that's why I use the example of all the administrators at that seed group saying, oh my goodness, you're right. We do such a good job in the public schools of Brookline of saying, we're going to have a day of dialogue. We're going to have a day of silence. We're going to, paint the sidewalk for pride parades and all of these different things. And we do less, and we're hearing from our students and we're hearing from our adults that we do less around, dismantling the inequities. We do a lot around, let's just celebrate and, build on top of what's underneath, instead of really turning an eye to what's underneath. So what we find is we're often contending with the new culture, the culture that's underneath the new culture, and that sometimes slows us in our work.
Thank you. Helen?
I hope that answers your question.
Well, thank you, Janae and Hae Young, for this presentation. I appreciate it. It's interesting what you talk about data, because I remember in the times that I've been on the school committee, first of all, we've had a number of initiatives about for equity and trying to work on the achievement gap, et cetera. And we've also collected data, but it's been in little pockets and it hasn't been continual. So there's no longitudinal data to see, are we improving? Are we getting worse? Right. What have we done that has improved, just so that we can continue to do it? Mm-hmm. It's sort of, what you're saying is absolutely correct. I remember the kids coming back from the MSAN conference, I think it was out in California, and they were very concerned about the disproportionality of, what's it called, discipline for kids of color. And they came back and did the analysis themselves.
They sure did.
And what was interesting to my recollection is that the following year, those statistics changed. Because once it was pointed out how much that, was happening, I think the teachers started to do some introspection. So obviously the data had a difference at that time. Did it continue? I don't know. I mean, that was probably at least 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, that group went to North Carolina and did that presentation for the school committee and for Brookline High School. And then you all know that the high school has, we used to call it Asking for Courage. It's now a Day of Racial Reform and Reconciliation. But those MSAN groups would do presentations for a couple of years after that experience to educators, to other students, and it was really great work. Of course, a couple of years go by and we weren't able to send groups of kids to MSAN conferences. They're even now still virtual. But anyways, yeah, you're absolutely right. That did.
So it's like there's pockets of that data. And, when our last strategic plan had to do with equity and trying, to measure what we're doing. I mean, there was all sorts of, pieces to the plan.
Yeah.
I think things got a bit better. And then, for whatever reason, it didn't continue.
Well, I will say too, that again, a number of folks left, to be quite honest and frank. A lot of the people who were leading, I was speaking with Gabe McCormick earlier today, the initial team who got to go to Harvard to do DataWise and got so much out of it in 2016 and loved it. I can say names if you want, but they're all pretty much gone. They're not here anymore. And so what we're hoping for is to build a small team, again, of folks who we know are going to be here and going to be able to continue the work. So that's not tied to individuals, but that it is something that we are doing, but the structures are in place.
Could you just explain what is DataWise?
So it's basically, it's Harvard's consulting sort of group, and I should find I'll put the link, a link somewhere so that people can take a look. But they're basically a group of professionals and obviously professors and grad students who started this, I want to say 2015, 2014. And they've gotten so much better now, but they work with districts to really help them hone and hold together how to sort of go through using that equity improvement process so they partner with RIDES to really, again, cull the data, interpret it quickly, figure out how to work on it, and move what they're interpreting to actual strategic, as Hae-Young said, smart goal work in the classroom. And they've just got this brilliant system that sort of shortcuts all of the, you sort of weed through the chaff and you can get to the pith of the thing and then know what to do. So they're the experts in it. The people, Gabe again is one person who's still here, who's on that team, can't sing their praises enough. And as I mentioned, just working with Dr. Lee Title and Darnese Almonte Jackson, and I've heard about this group for a long time, and they're a lot cheaper now than they were years ago. So that's our hope.
I'm sorry, you said, but how much is it?
I believe, I forgot what I said. I think it's $1,725 per person. So we were thinking about a 7-person team, right around $12,500, which we're thinking that our equity budget can sustain for next year. So we will apply.
Great, thank you.
All right, another question I have. So you referenced policies and how there's some that you feel necessitate modification, and then also some other ones not yet created that you think would be helpful. Do you have perhaps some examples?
Let me think for a second. It was great to sit on finance yesterday, thank you, Mariah, and hear about something. It's not a policy, but just this idea of students and families who are free and reduced going back for a second lunch, and having that challenge of that's probably not the best example, but there are a number of pieces in place. I think about, again, I don't know that I would call it a policy per se, but certainly a process. If we think, for example, and I know this has come up in some of the meetings, subcommittee meetings before, but we've had students who are a part of our success program who haven't been able to pay the full fee for their uniforms for their sports team. And so they're not getting their uniforms. They're not allowed to play on the day of the game, whereas everybody else is getting a uniform because they haven't paid yet. And something that we haven't really done our due diligence around is saying, you know what, in our system, if we understand, and I know Kyle has talked with many folks about this, but you know, how can we have a process in place that understands with our athletics department, this student identifies as a student who's a part of the Step Success program. We're not going to give this family a hard way to go. We're going to make sure this child isn't embarrassed in front of all of their friends and gets a shirt and can go and play in the game. So it's little things like that that we're seeing happening left and right. And it's some of it's simple, but it's things that we haven't taken, you know, a trained eye toward so that we can avoid the harm that happens just, you know, in our day to day.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Stephen?
Hi, yeah, just
Hi,
a couple of
Stephen.
things. So thanks for that great presentation, Janae and Hae-Young. Two thoughts. One is, so Dr. Guillory, now that Erin is not part of the district, is the responsibilities that she oversaw, they're sort of dispersed among a number of staffers, right? No. Tam.
Tam Tran hired in that spot.
Is it possible, since the problem is more that the data are not crunched rather than not collected, is it possible just to take those data sources and post them to a single web page, for instance, so that they could be made available to community members that may have that expertise, so that the responsibility of crunching and drawing insights from that data doesn't fall entirely to the Office of Educational Equity, and that, so that the community itself can also start to dig into it and see if we can come up with insights from it as well. I would think that this is an issue that a lot of members in our community would feel pretty passionately about and would be eager to get their hands into.
One of the things that we're actually talking about is data dashboards. So Tam is actually exploring that
That's
work
great.
right now. Yeah.
That's great. So that seems like gold standard. I wonder if we could just post those 7 data sources though as web links and just
Wouldn't necessarily. I mean, I think we could do it blindly, but there are layers that go along with that. So I don't want to promise or commit to it right this second.
Understood.
We have an amazing panorama survey dashboard. In fact, students just took the panorama survey again yesterday in their advisories across the district. And to Dr. Guillory's point, there are obviously some protections and things there. And I do want to mention too, it's not just the Office of Equity, the Office of Teaching and Learning, the Office of Student Services are also pulling and interpreting and using data. And we're just thinking a lot about what that synchronization looks like and how we can be more effective in our shared narrative around the work that's happening.
I see. One other question. So so I feel like we've focused a lot on data in this conversation. Putting that aside for a moment, are there, as equity practitioners, are there indicators of change that you look for? I know it's only been a year, and the process of shifting along the DBIE spectrum is a very long one, if that shift happens at all. Are there indicators that you look for as you practice professional development or as you engage in professional development that you see that to you suggest change, or is that not the kind of question I should be asking? Should I just wait for data to be better crunched and analyzed, and that should be my source for looking for conclusions?
That's a great question. And what's been really fantastic this year, and I know Dr. Grace Way is on the call too, we've been able to really sort of coordinate time with the Office of Teaching and Learning to think about look fors, listen fors, in terms of what our evaluators, quite honestly, our supervisors, so curriculum coordinators, department heads, are thinking about as we go into classrooms and watch teacher practice and educator practice, and how those pieces align with not only best practice, or I'd like to say better practices with teaching and learning, but those are our equity goals too, right? We've talked so much about the fact that this is about the instructional core. And so it's been great this year to be able to meet fairly regularly with our leaders in the Office of Teaching and Learning, and really align ourselves. We're talking about something, people maybe are familiar with sort of the instructional rounds, or sometimes people call them like equity learning walks, or there are different terms for them, but we're talking a lot about thinking about getting a small team together to go and do some of that as our coordinators and our evaluators really get sort of tuned on what the look-fors are around some of these pieces that we're talking about. And a lot of that training is happening this year. The Office of Teaching and Learning is doing an amazing job. So we are in process. Stephen, I'll tell you that Hae-Young and I always collect pretty rigorous feedback on every PD we do. So we have a lot of data again.
Can I ask you to characterize at all what you're seeing in the feedback that you're getting? Are you seeing shifts in the responses to professional development or to any other kinds of trainings or events that you're part of?
We're definitely seeing, sorry,
go ahead.
no worries. We're definitely seeing some of that mindset shift that we've been talking about, and a little bit less of the sort of concrete shifts in terms of pedagogy and practice at an adult student level. And part of that is some of the work that Hae-Young and I have been doing is really a lot about that mindset shift. We're talking about defining terms right now. What do we mean by, again, white supremacy culture or whiteness, or, we can go on and on about some of those things, the 4 eyes of oppression. So we're still not starting over, but we're still reviewing a lot of the basics. And as Hae-Young mentioned, we're also moving some of that into what does cultural proficiency look like in the classroom? What is culturally responsive pedagogy? So we're doing a lot of that work too. It's just to your point, in some of the feedback, we're hearing a lot of things that say, gosh, can we have a little bit more of this? This was helpful here. I tried this. Now what Hae-Young and I need to do, along with our other partners in central office, is get back into those classrooms and with the supervisors to say, this is what you were taught. Now let's see, how this is showing up for our students and in your practice. And those are the pieces that we're still kind of working on and getting to. I don't want to hog all the talk time.
And I would just like to add, and thank you, Stephen, for that question. Those are the look-fors, and some of the immediate feedback that we get is, we mentioned on the boundary slide that we would like to partner with educators and have them not come to us for all the solutions with a blank slate. So when we do a professional development, for example, for interrupting discrimination, subtle biases, like when we do these professional developments and give educators tools and resources, we really hope that the educators will try using them. And, we have seen some changes, right? The DBIE spectrum is not just a linear thing, it goes in cycles. So depending on where the educator started on their journey, some educators are really putting into practice and coming to us after they've had a thought about using the toolkits and the resources that we've given them, and asking us for feedback. So just even in those small moments of interactions, the way we have our conversations around a bias incident, for example, at a school, like we're seeing that there is a shift, even if it feels slow at times. We're seeing that it is helping the educators and the school leaders in having these conversations.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Helen?
I had a thought, and I don't know if it's something that's appropriate or not, but I'm wondering if we, the school committee, together with maybe the central administration, might do one of your workshops.
I would love that.
During the summer. We have our workshop in the summer.
Yeah.
I'm sort of throwing this out, and certainly others can say whether they think it's a good idea or not, but I think it would help in the understanding of some of what you do. I mean, I sort of get it here, but not here yet.
Definitely. Dr. Giller and I have talked about that. And
I think it would do a number of things that would be helpful in the summer when we have time to sit around and really grapple with some of these things.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that suggestion, Helen. I agree with you. I think that would be a very good exercise for us as a school committee to engage in. It reminds me of a conversation we had a few years back on school committee that was a little broader regarding sort of getting to know everyone in central office and their roles and the work that they're doing and familiarizing ourselves with it on a more direct day-to-day level to gain further appreciation and insight. So I do think in particular with equity, that would be a good direction for us to go in.
Well, there are secondary gains we can get from it too, in addition to understanding, just getting to know one another, especially the school committee once did this years ago, and I'm trying to remember the name of the woman who wrote a book who came and did a workshop with the school committee and senior principals. Do you remember, were you here, Janae, when that happened?
I'm sure I was, and I'm drawing a blank.
I can't, it was a woman who, I'll think about it, but sorry. Anyway, we did do one like that and it was very effective, very important.
Great. Well, and Suzanne knows we do sessions with Brookline churches, like, we're doing work with the community beyond, who's literally attached to the public schools. And so it makes perfect sense that we could spend some time with school committee.
Great. Thank you.
All right, so thank you very much for this presentation. Quite thorough, very insightful. And we are certain that we'll hear more about this and we'll continue to collaborate on it best we can.
Thank you.
So that brings us to school committee actions, proposed revision of the public schools of Brookline substance use prevention and education policy, first reading. So at the policy subcommittee, we were taking a look at the substance use prevention and education policy that had last been voted on in 2016. The reason we were looking at this was in response to community feedback regarding reports, in particular at the high school, but also at the K-8s, that a lot of students were getting uncomfortable with their exposure to secondhand smoke, in particular from marijuana and other such substances like e-cigarettes, vaping devices. So we took a look at this at the policy subcommittee and decided to update the language somewhat. So in the original or the most recent 2016 language, there was no reference to cannabis or e-cigarette vaping devices. They were not popularized then, if they even existed yet. And so we have explicitly added that into the draft that's before you today. The other substantive change is there is now a fourth paragraph under the objectives of this program section, and I'll read that in full. It's not that long. To teach students to respect all members of their school community by refraining to use alcohol, cannabis, e-cigarettes, vaping devices, tobacco, and other drugs in a manner that could expose and thus adversely impact the health of others who abstain from such use. Specifically, students shall be instructed not to smoke anywhere on school grounds, including bathrooms. The explicit mention of bathrooms was to address the very specific complaint that we've been hearing that there seems to be a fair amount of that activity reportedly occurring in bathrooms. So I'm wondering about thoughts from school committee members. The policy subcommittee unanimously voted to recommend this to the full committee.
What is the consequence of smoking in the bathrooms or vaping or doing any of those?
So for the specifics, I believe that would be addressed in the high school handbook.
Right.
We
I'm
didn't
just
want to
curious.
get too detailed in the policy because this
No, I
actually,
agree. This was just a question on the side. I agree.
Okay.
It's not, we shouldn't be determining that, but I was just curious because I know with smoking, it was a problem in the bathrooms too, smoking cigarettes. And somehow we were able to get kids outside doing it. And it had to be on the sidewalk because that was the only public area. They couldn't smoke on the field or near the school. I think there's some law that you can't.
at the subcommittee level, we discussed that actually, and there is a desire from at least many in district leadership to not have smoking on school grounds at all. And so we moved away as a district from having outdoor smoking.
Well, no,
Ryan?
the problem
Oh,
is
sorry.
we don't have the right to determine what happens on public, you know, on sidewalks that are public. We do have the right on our property.
Mariah?
I have one question and one grammatical nitpick, two grammatical nitpicks. The question is, why does this only start in grade 5?
Because hopefully nobody smokes before that.
Or there was discussion at the subcommittee level of starting it earlier, and we would like to, but at the same time, we want to be realistic about alignment with current practices. And until there are obviously budgetary implications on extending it to earlier grades, as well as time considerations for minute allotments. So that is a little more of a complex issue, but there's certainly a commitment that I was hearing from district leadership to move in that direction.
My next question is there one program or more than one program? Because the first paragraph after the bullets talks about drug prevention education programs. And then after that, it uses the singular. So I'm just wondering, is there one program or multiple programs, and whatever it is, can we just make it consistent throughout?
Yes, okay, I'll make a note of that.
Okay, and then I think it's in the last bullet where you said refraining to, I think it's refraining from.
Okay.
And then one last question actually on that bullet, where it says specifically students shall be instructed not to smoke anywhere on school grounds, but not to get too pedantic, but smoking isn't the only thing that people are doing with these things. So are we only talking about smoking, or are we talking about using these substances?
Right, I agree. We could change that not to use anywhere on school grounds, make it
Thank you.
broader.
Well, I would like you to check the law because I think it's illegal to smoke, and we may want to say that in here, if that's true. So maybe check with town council or.
Yeah, no, I agree, Helen. I was going to say the same thing. I think it's against the law. There are signs up outside of schools that say no smoking, something within so many feet or something, so.
Yeah, it's true for workmen who come into the building, it's true for staff.
But isn't the point of that sentence that's about the specific construction?
Right, so Helen, this falls more broadly under in the instruction section of the policy handbook. So we were looking at it within that context, but I do understand your point.
Well, see if there's a way of working it in, because I think that's important. If something's illegal, it's not just instructing, it's making sure they're aware it is illegal.
All right.
So, it isn't just about students, like you said, Helen, there are workers who come into the building, the staff, any adults. I mean, no one's allowed to smoke inside in these public buildings. There are no smoking bans. So somehow that message has to be relayed.
So are you suggesting that instead of to teach students to respect all members of their school community, broaden that, so we're not just talking about students? I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's the law. It's the law.
What's the problem with referencing a law?
No, it's not a problem. We can add that. Anyone else?
Yeah, there it is. Dr. Guillory has the law right there, so.
No, thank you. Somebody got it quickly. What does it say?
No person shall use a tobacco product as defined in section 6 of chapter 270 within the school buildings or facilities or on the grounds or school buses of a public or private primary or secondary school or at a school-sponsored event.
Only tobacco?
Well, at that time, this is an old.
That's the federal.
I read what was written.
So we could mention that it's.
Well, there's also no drug zone, so maybe that's a different law, but there are signs all over saying you're in a no drug zone within certain feet of schools.
Then there's also alcohol, so.
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and in addition, as Helen said, that Dr. Guillory just read the federal law. In addition, Massachusetts requires that all students refrain from smoking on school property.
So, I don't know if upholding the law is motivation enough, but I do think this idea that the reason they have the law is really to protect the common good, the public. That's why we've gone to this no smoking, on airplanes and theaters. There used to be smoking in a lot of these places. So when you come into instruction, it's kind of knowing maybe a little bit about the history of how smoking was allowed and how it came to be that smoking is not allowed and why.
Okay, I think that's a good idea to incorporate that. Any other feedback? All right, then that moves us to subcommittee and liaison reports. Helen, capital
Actually,
improvement.
David,
Yes.
given all of this, do we need a second drafting of this, or can we go ahead and move this?
Well, we need another draft because some school committee members have suggested some.
I mean, pending your integration of a reference to, no? Helen says no.
Wait,
They have to have a
we have
second
to
reading.
vote.
I
what-
yield.
We have to have a second reading regardless.
Really?
All right, so now moving on to subcommittee and liaison reports. Capital improvements, Helen?
So Suzanne and I had the pleasure yesterday of visiting the Driscoll project and walking through it and seeing some of how the school is coming along, and hopefully we'll be ready on time. So that was very illuminating, and I think that's it for now in terms of capital.
It will be ready on time.
Okay.
That's what they're saying. I will say, if you do take a tour, be sure and see the mechanical rooms. There are many down in the basement. It's impressive. I don't even know what's down, but the big pipes, just all kinds, whoever knows about it, it's amazing. The whole geothermal stuff.
Yeah.
Right, Andy? It's impressive. You've seen it.
Yes, although what was most impressive to me was just how narrow the geothermal pipe is that carries it all in.
Oh, really?
I would have thought it would be a much broader gauge. But,
All right, curriculum, Suzanne?
Yes, we had a meeting this week. It was a lovely, lively, thoughtful discussion. Okay, maybe not lovely, lively and thoughtful. I'll put it there. So we had three main topics. We talked about the current trends in M-Class. That's our universal literacy screening in K through 2. We did an overview of the data that we have so far. We did a bit of a deep dive in one area or two, knowing that we've only just started that. So we've done beginning of year and we've done middle of year, and this is our first year. So we're looking forward to really seeing how that plays out and really informs instruction for our students. So that was one conversation we had. And as I mentioned earlier, the good news in my mind is that faculty meetings are being devoted to going over this data with teachers in groups. So a teacher doesn't have to look at it alone. They get support and help as they try to make sense out of this data. And really, that leads to differentiation for our students, our individual students' instruction. And the first efforts have gone well. So everybody's on board and they're doing the tests. So that's good. Our second big topic was child study teams. That kind of follows from this. Again, we're looking to see what is it that we are doing in Tier 1 instruction. And to that end, Dr. Way is going to have the new Teachers Center conduct some instructional reviews in classrooms, so she knows exactly, what it is that is going on to address some of these challenges, and then from there build a plan for Tier 1. So again, that's ongoing work, but it's very exciting work. And we did talk about SITs, which are the equivalent of child study teams, but at the high school. And so there again, they bring data together and talk about students. And then our third big topic was enrichment. We did not cover that nearly as deeply as we would have liked. We just ran out of time. And we had, things to think about. So just defining enrichment is a bit of a challenge, and we're looking at that. Do we look at core subjects versus non-core subjects? Are non-core subjects, in fact, enriching? Are they something that are, you know, flexible or maybe an alternative, or are they something that we believe are almost part of core? So things like music, conservatory, art, PE, you know, world language, those are things that you might consider non-core, and how do they fit into the enrichment programs, and how are they part of our core program? That's as far as we got with that. More to be discussed.
Thank you, Suzanne. Valerie, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice.
Yeah, so the subcommittee hasn't met, but I did want to just make an announcement on the 8th of March from 6 to 8 p.m. at the main library. There's going to be a program for caregivers of LGBTQ plus children of all ages. And there'll be information on how to support your children. There'll be other parents and caregivers and professionals providing information. And that's being put on by the task force, the new townwide LGBTQ task force. I will send the flyer around and make sure that it gets posted around as well.
Thank you. Mariah, anything further on finance?
Thanks. I think we covered most of the things that I wanted to talk about. We also had a very helpful in-depth presentation from Ruth Burdell on the non-personnel expenses yesterday that went into a lot of the details and gave some great updates on some of the changes in the accounting that have been made to align with the DESI requirements. And we also, as I alluded to earlier, discussed the building rental fees, but that will be going back again to subcommittee in 2 weeks. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Suzanne, government relations?
Yeah, we're going to have the legislative meeting with the legislators here on March 13th at 4 o'clock, and we have a pretty full attendance, so we're excited about that.
Andy, negotiations?
Yeah, we had our first session with the BEU on Tuesday, February 28th to start discussing the paraprofessional contract. I unfortunately couldn't be there because of a family medical emergency, so David chaired that session. Do you want to summarize that, David?
Yes, essentially we met primarily to try to discuss ground rules for moving forward. We also agreed to some next dates. So we will next be meeting on March 7th. Then we will meet again on March 28th. We also agreed to dates in April, April 6th, April 11th, and April 25th. Any additional liaisons or updates?
Oh, just from the BEF, that Trivia B is coming up. So I actually don't have the dates in front of me, but it's a fun time. I've done it before. And you get a table of people and you try and win on trivia. It's like, you know.
The school committee in the past has had a table.
I believe it's March 31st, 6:30 to 9:30.
I think you're right, Andy. Thank you.
Any other liaison updates?
David, I'm planning on sending the recruitment email out for the community panel on sustainability and climate education within the next week. So I should hopefully have something to liaise with shortly.
All right, very good. Anyone else? All right, that brings us.
David, can we mention?
That brings us to new business. Is there any new business?
David, can you hear me?
Oh, now I can't, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Can we mention the event this weekend?
No.
No.
Okay, there we go. Then I haven't mentioned it. Thank you.
All right, any new business? Okay, seeing none. I move that we meet in executive session pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, for the following purposes. Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Brookline Educators Union, BEU paraprofessionals, if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining and litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares. Purpose 7, to review and approve executive session minutes from the following meeting, February 2nd, 2023. And purpose 2, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel. executive assistant to the school committee. And we likely will be returning to open session after the executive session. So is there a second? Thank you, Andy. Stephen, your vote?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. Our next agenda item is a possible vote to appoint the executive assistant to the school committee, subject to the successful completion of contract negotiations. Now, Helen worked a lot on this process, so Helen, I'm going to turn it over to you if you'd like to explain what took place.
Sure, of course. So as everybody knows, we advertised the position of assistant to the school committee. On the committee was Andy, Nancy Raygor, and myself. And Ty Fluker.
Val was also on the committee.
I'm sorry?
Val was also
I'm
on the
so
committee.
sorry, Val. I'm so sorry. I apologize.
Quite all right, Helen.
And our HR director, Ty Fluker, was incredibly helpful in organizing all this. And I really want to give a shout out and thanks to her for that. We had 21 applicants and a very diverse group. And we determined to interview 2 of the applicants. And through the interview process, determined that we would like to offer the position to Betsy Fitzpatrick, who works in the system presently as the superintendent's assistant. And anything else that I left out? Anybody on the committee? No?
All right, so would someone like to move?
I'd like to move it. I'd like to move to hire Betsy Fitzpatrick as our assistant to the school committee.
I'll second.
All right, thank you, Suzanne. Stephen, your vote?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Helen?
Absolutely, yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. Congratulations, Betsy. All right, so
I
with
move that we
that,
adjourn.
Suzanne moves that we adjourn. Stephen, is that a second?
Yes.
All right, Stephen, your vote.
That's a yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Mariah?
To adjourn, yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. We are adjourned.